Welcome back to this podcast that is only for students who want to improve their media literacy, cultivate their critical thinking, and to perhaps apply these in a potential media career. You never know. But what we do know is this: there's not a subject in school or college that I know of that is purely dedicated to critical thinking, media, digital, and political literacy. It might be woven into subjects, but we know it's not a returning subject that comes up as, let's say, frequently as English or history or geography or science. And that's because it's never been so important as it is now. And I think we'll see a shift and we'll start to see hey, you might end up teaching a course like this. So in this third episode, what I wanted to do was, we've talked about the media, the way print media is kind of structured and who's behind the scenes. And so far, I'm just kind of like doing a surface level sort of skim of these things to kind of introduce you to the matter. The second one was about, oh my gosh, what was the second episode about? I've recorded so much, I stream continuously, and I also have my own YouTube channel. What was the second episode about? Well, you know, because you've heard it and you're right here. Completely spaced out. But in this episode, what I wanted to do was talk to you about this thing called copywriting. And now, copywriting, if you know, you know, but if you don't know, it's a very technical way of writing that is common in all sort of media, not just the media industry, but you might be a journalist, you might be a magazine, sorry. You might be a magazine, so you'll need copywriters, you'll need copy editors, as well as the actual journalist, right? So the journalist writes a story, the copywriter writes things in a more sort of, I'm going to say removed way, but in a way that is to promote something. It's quite surgical, it's quite clinical. There's lots of drafting that goes on, and it's to convince the reader about something or to inform them in a way, but there's always an objective. There's always an objective. There's a call to action. There's some result that that copywriter and whoever's paying the copywriter wants. There's some result. So whether it's me copywriting about a gig that's about to take place, maybe it's a press release, I want you to attend, I want you to buy a ticket, or a copywriter for a political journal, and they might be supporting journalist content with additional content, and then they will need to have an awareness of what position or stance the publication takes and ensure whatever they write doesn't conflict with that stance. So you have to be very measured, you have to be very careful when you're a copywriter. You've really got to know your audience, but you've also got to be consistently aware of you, your brand, your business, your objectives. And if I tell you that a majority of the marketing material or promotional material, perhaps pieces in the press, less journalistic, more sort of so-called factual, if I tell you that all of that is being written and created to convince you of something rather than just giving you information, you would look at it a little bit with a side eye, as you should, because I've worked in publicity, marketing, press office, public relations for 20 years. My first job was in publicity and a press office. I was in print journalism. I was in publishing as well, and I've kind of had to learn. I did student journalism and I've done some journalism as well. But as a rookie, even when I was working on newsroom floors, you have to know how to write and write well. And then if you get into the marketing communications PR space, you have to learn how to copyright. And copywriting, I find it so exhausting. Literally, if this was a video, I would have all kinds of pauses and zooms going on, but this isn't. This is like a longer form piece of content. It's a podcast episode. But yeah, I would literally just try to get across to you how painstakingly exhausting sometimes copywriting can be. Let me take a swig of this gorgeous chai. And the reason being is that the drafting process can take a long time because it's really got to hit so many objectives. Well, it's got to deliver on the main objective, but it's got to hit lots of points. So you got the who. Have you heard of the 5 W's and the H, the how? So you got the who, what, why, when, where, and then how. Like with any sort of like news reporting, if you're copywriting something like a press release, some information, it's got to answer all those things. So who is it about, but who is it for? Where was this information, like whatever it is, if it's a product you're selling, where can it be found? Or if it was an incident that happened, where did it happen? Like this, you've got to sort of like use the where, the why, the what, the who, all of that in different ways. And you've got to ask yourself the question, make sure you are answering the question. And then before you know, you've got a script. That script will get so many drafts. Unless you're completely solo, you don't have anyone else in your team, but you will have to have that copy approved before it is published. So if it's not a news story, you can safely assume that that was a piece of copy that was should have been meticulously written, drafted, and went through a series of approvals. And it's, again, makes sense. It's completely sensible if you're trying to sell something, market something, inform people about your product or an incident or something that affects you, and you've got you've got a dog in the fight, you've got something to gain from it, then you've got to make sure that that piece of content is written well. But now we have people relying on AI software and programs to do a lot of writing for them. And you can end up getting something really SEO rich, which is search engine optimization. Basically means lots of words in there which are like superb keywords and searchable. And it means that if your piece of copy, if your few paragraphs have lots of that in it, then when people search for your theme, your product, whatever it is, it will come up higher, right, in the search ranks. But people can get this stuff written now by AI, by ChatGPT. Personally, when I have done it, and I don't do this so much because my job doesn't sort of involve so much of that kind of like copywriting stuff. It's more high level, strategically sort of analyzing, advising, consulting. But I'm when it comes to copywriting, I'm a purist because you will get something very generic. And if it's for a little square space on your publication or an article, then fine, and just kind of cut the corner. But you're not going to get sort of a rich piece of content that has a tonality, that has a sort of a sense of your brand and what you're about in it. You just won't. And the reason why that is because when you are copywriting for yourself or a brand or whoever, you will begin to establish a brand voice. And that's why copywriting is so powerful. As you start to establish a brand voice, people will recognize, oh, okay, yes, this is very typical of this brand or business to speak and communicate in this style. Of course, at some stage, you could have an AI sort of bot or whatever software to recognize your style and to rinse and repeat. But I mean, if you're communicating in a perhaps more qualitative, intimate way with your audience, they're going to tell that there's something going on. Let me give you an example. So I used to do PR for a very well known, I won't name names, but a very well known network for working mums in London. And when I say PR, I did some consulting and also some copywriting. And I have to tell you, the founder of this network, who sent an email newsletter out and still does, perhaps fortnightly, maybe weekly, this email newsletter, when the founder writes it themselves, has so many typos, but it's brilliant. And I used to always say, even if I'm not doing it for you or not helping you with something, the fact that your voice comes through, even though it's got typos and mistakes, your voice is so it's just there, and people recognize it, and then they trust it. You build that trust. In the same way, marketer, so-called guru, I say so-called a lot, Seth Godin, who has been doing a daily blog for goodness how long. Um, I don't know whether he's using AI or whether he prefers to sort of like continue with the practice of writing himself, because there is something in it. Like I would always advise anyone who's wanting to get into the media or involved in the media, especially if you're coming up, to enjoy the writing process, because you could call this ignorant or wishful thinking, but you want to establish a way to connect and speak with your audience, and to outsource it to an AI every time will not establish that intimacy that you want. Sometimes your tone might change because you're sort of expressing and communicating a different emotion, and AI can't always pick that up. And by the time you've got something from AI and then you sort of changed it, it's kind of lost. It probably just needed to stay in the AI voice, because now you've muddied it. So either completely rely on AI to produce that script and that copy for you, or do it yourself. But the point of this episode is to tell you that we're not just being fed stories by journalists and editors. We are hearing from commentators their unfiltered opinions on microphones. We are also reading punchy captions and articles and journalistic stories. And all of those have been intentionally written. They're not just written to give you the facts. They are written to give, well, to get something from you. Um, something I find when I'm doing a reacting to the headlines episode on my channel here, I find that maybe there's a story that's come out and it's been reported in more than one publication and it's reading the same. I immediately know that was a press release that was sent, and that's why there's like a concert of publications all publishing a similar story. That press release again was written by somebody from that organization, to do with the announcement, it's something to do with the UN, and it was around media and tech regulation. And maybe it was UN, maybe it was another body, but it was to do with AI, tech, media, whatever regulation. And that organization would have painstakingly written, drafted, edited, approved that press release before it went out to all those publications, so that publications can do a copy and paste, as well as add in a few words of their own just to make it less copy and paste. And then they'll publish it. They'll only publish what they feel like is probably the most relevant for their audience. And so that's how it works. If you already knew that, great. If you didn't, then I would just ask you to look out for these things, these few things I'm going to mention now. What do you think the objective was for the piece that you just read? What was the objective? What was their intention behind it? What do they want from you? And then what's the call to action? Is there some kind of result, or, well, when we talk about the objective, that's kind of linked to the result, but is there an action that they want you to take by the time you finish reading and consuming that piece? And then next, how does it fit into the bigger, wider agenda? Whether it's the organizations, and if it's not fully sort of communicated, then does it fit into any other agenda? Or is it just a purely financial thing that they're just trying to make money and sell a product or a service? So look out for these things. It's important that we always have this slight side eye when we are consuming different forms of media. You've got to think about who's written it, why they've written it, what do they want from you. Really important. I hope these episodes are helping you. It's a podcast that I've created primarily for students and young people so that you can begin to just, even if you're not dedicating yourself to it full time, if it's sort of happening in parallel, that you are improving your media literacy, asking questions, and also cultivating critical thinking about things, and it's happening in parallel with everything else that you've got going on in your life, professional, student, sort of study life, or personal, then that's great. It just means that it's like an additional bit of armor for you. It's an additional bit of protection for you. And, that I think is incredibly important, especially now. I would love to hear from you. I think by the time I've published these episodes, I'll also have it available on all audio podcast platforms. So, not just here on my channel. And so, if you are listening to this on one of those platforms like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, then I would absolutely adore a review and a rating. It would really help me out. And as you know, I'm not new at any of this, but I'm new to creating content. I went a bit creating content around this. And so your support is very much appreciated and is valuable, as is the new community that I am growing here. So you can always join on YouTube or Patreon. Take your pick. What's different? Patreon, I think, might be slightly more of an investment compared to the inner circle on YouTube. But what happens on Patreon is that I also publish articles and pieces and personal pieces there, and members see that first. And with YouTube members, if there's any sort of niche or special pieces that I'm uploading and publishing, they'll see it first by maybe 48 hours. So consider how you'd like to support. And if you didn't want to join either of those sort of ways, then you could always send me a little something. Now, I don't think I have the buy me a coffee thing set up or my Cash App, and if I do, then great. But I do have like super thanks and that kind of thing available. All right, that's enough of me asking more from you, but I really hope that this is giving you value. That's the whole reason I've been doing this, and I will be back with another episode. Share your thoughts. I would love to hear from you, and it would only help me refine the program of content that I've planned. I'll see you in the next one.